and welcome to the GP Soccer Podcast, conversation with the coach. And as you all know, that coach part can always change. And today it's going to be conversation with the author. And I've been looking forward to this conversation. And I guess it is Mark Franek. I'm looking forward to this conversation with Mark because he's written a terrific book. And I do mean that, not because he's on the show today, but he has written a terrific book, which is entitled The American Soccer Nation, a remarkable 150-year history of Yanks on a roll from mob football to the modern game. Now, our guest, Mark Franek, is an American sports writer, former attorney, and educator. He holds a Juris Doctor from Temple University, a Doctor of Education from Penn, a BA, and a Master of Arts in Teaching from Duke. And over his career, Mark has published more than 50 opinion editorials and articles in major American newspapers and magazines on a variety of sports and human interest themes. He currently teaches English classes in a series of electives, including the History of U.S. Soccer course at YSC Academy, an independent school fully embedded with the Major League Soccer's Philadelphia Union franchise. Franek also served as an English teacher and dean of students at the William Penn Charter Quaker School, one of the oldest independent schools in the nation. Now, over nearly 3 decades, Mark has had the privilege of teaching more than a score of student athletes who went on to play professional soccer in MLS in Europe. His former students include Olympic and World Cup players. Others, after hanging up their boots, went on to become coaches, technical directors, general managers, part owners of professional teams, or professionals in fields unrelated to soccer. Their DNA and dreams are certainly in this book. Well, Mark Franek, welcome to the GP Soccer Podcast, conversation with the author.
Thank you, Gio, and the audience. It's great to be here, and thanks for that illustrative and illustrious opening. It's embarrassing that I've racked up all these degrees, as my wife likes to remind me every so often. So I'm glad to be here and to share for a few minutes some stories that might be of interest to the listeners.
Yeah, and as I know, I've been looking forward personally. The book is terrific. And if you're a soccer junkie or in my case, being a bit of a history buff in general, this combines the best of both worlds, that being, history of American soccer. And then, if you're into history as well. So, Mark, here's where I like to start with all of my guests. Let's go way back in time, when you were a kid growing up. Where did you grow up? Was soccer always part of your DNA? Did you play other sports? Take us through the Mark Franek story as a youngster growing up.
Sure. I grew up in York, Pennsylvania, South Central PA. And soccer was not part of my family's DNA growing up. So I came to the sport late relative to other soccer aficionados. For example, my father had me playing gridiron football for my first 6 years in baseball. And I didn't transition into soccer until my early teens, which makes me late to the game. And so I really didn't get started until early teens, like I said. And long after some of the DNA now that I've come to know, because my son is involved in high-level soccer, nobody these days gets started in their early teens and makes it anywhere out of recreational ball. So I managed to do pretty well, though, coming out of York, Pennsylvania, coming late to the sport. So it wasn't part of a family, and it wasn't part of a soccer hotbed. But what I found in my teens is that I had a certain aggression and a certain athleticism, maybe that was hewed from my 6 years of playing football, that did help me later on as I edged into college and beyond.
Now, was there anyone along the way that, inspires you to kind of take a path more towards soccer? Because you did play at Duke, correct me if I'm wrong?
Correct. Yes, I did have a stint at Duke, and partially a story about that was I went to a 9th grade soccer camp at Duke University, and I met there a coach who had my group for the week, and he really enjoyed my play, and he happened to be a friend of Coach Rennie at the time. So what happened was at the end of every day, the coaches would choose their best players to invite to the showcase on the varsity field every night. And Coach Hackett always chose me, and I must have made an impression on some of those quote unquote all-star games because I got on the radar of Coach Rennie at the time. So I was kind of one of those young people that got to be noticed at a college camp, if you will, in the mid to late 80s, which is not rare these days. But, the mid 80s, there wasn't a lot of soccer going on all around the country. But I got noticed just because I was attending a camp.
let's take a look at your book. And as before I hit the record button, you and I had a little conversation about the process. As in terms of writing a book, the actual process, what was your process? Having interviewed, Mark, a number of authors on this show, I've always been fascinated by, the approach that authors have taken. Some are very streaky writers. Some folks really dedicate a certain period of time to write, to the morning or the afternoon. I interviewed one guy who didn't, went through the process. It was almost 7 years of his life before he finished the book. What was your process in writing this book?
Yeah, great question, Gio. If I could, I'm going to start with the genesis of the project,
Sure.
if I could, and then get into the process. So the book started not as a book, but as a class. When I got hired at YSE Academy, which is this high school that's completely embedded within the Philadelphia Union and runs in tandem with the youth academy of the MLS team, I was charged by my boss to create and then teach a U.S. soccer class. And that was three or 4 years ago. And I jumped into it by reading everything I could get my hands on. Even though I had followed soccer for half a century and loved soccer, I wasn't keen or knew that much about the history. And what I discovered after reading chapters and trying to teach from books is that it was the books that I was reading remarkably dull, to use my students' words, fragmented. It's not a word that they used, and negative. And even though the writing was great, and I know that writers don't get to choose the names of their books. I mean, imagine trying to teach a book called Why the U.S. Will Never Win a World Cup, end quote, to a bunch of 15-year-olds. I mean, it means them want to run to the nearest corner flag and stab out their eyes. So it became clear to me that the stuff that I was trying to teach and slide into their 9th and 10th grade English classes was not going to work. And it caused me to start writing my own. And Gio, to get to the writing process, what I could do as a writer before I took this major book endeavor, what I was good at was writing for the paper. For years, I wrote for the Philadelphia Inquirer and had a column that would appear every month or so. And I would write about school issues or athletic issues or sport issues from around the building. So I was confident that I could write 800 to 1,000 words on spec, but I had never tackled a book-length manuscript. So to go back to the original genesis, I started writing because I didn't have a book that I felt that I could teach high school kids that was inspiring and confident and, that was about their journey and a journey that they could see themselves in the pages. And then it led me to start writing chapters chronologically. And I basically tackled each chapter as an extended op-ed. Hell, if I can write 1,000 words on spec, then I can write 10 pages per chapter. So that got me started.
It's funny, you talk about the number of words. I've written numerous articles for a number of different soccer journals. And I, like you, felt very comfortable putting, 800 to 1,000 words in an article. And having just recently finished my own book, I said, well, I think I'll just take the approach as I have with my articles. Just think about 800, 1,000 words, 1,500 words as a chapter, and then take it from there. And then lo and behold, each one of these mini articles, if you will, became full-on chapters. And then 15 chapters later, I've got a book. Really fascinating stuff. You mentioned that the negative connotations of so many of these books. I have your book in my hand right now, and in the introduction, you list all these books that you talked about, and it is doom and gloom. It is doom and gloom. So with that said, you consciously rejected that doom and gloom narrative. What were some of the moments in your research where the pessimism felt almost unavoidable, and how did you decide what not to include?
Right, great question. I mean, I think if you're going to tell the American soccer history, which I attempt to do, of course you're going to have to cover many of the dumb things that we did when we argued. I'm talking about our own ambassadors and our own predecessors in the game. Yes, the United States soccer history is littered with own goals, if you will, and that we have to be apologetic about our past and critical about where we are and where we're moving. So I tried to stay away from that while still being, of course, honest about our own history. And I tried to keep my students in mind. I mean, here I am in a front row seat with 80 to 90 young men from ninth through 12th grades. They're all at this school because they aspire to be professional soccer athletes. Now, they know that the odds are stacked against them, but the school where I'm teaching has remarkable odds. 15% of them will sign a pro contract by the time they get to high school graduation, and a full 30% will sign pro deals by the time they get to age 22. So back to the negativity, I think that was the thing that I tried to keep in mind. Listen, I want to teach our history, and I want to err, if you will, on the side of being optimistic. There is wonderful stories of grit and perseverance and diversity that's true about the American soccer history that I don't think has been covered adequately. It doesn't mean that there aren't some great soccer historians and wonderful soccer writers. There are. And particularly in the last 10 years or so, they've been getting more press. You know, we soccer writers too often seem to have gotten benched by the mainstream press. And I think that that's changing somewhat in the last decade or so. But back to the endeavor that I had. Okay, we have soccer here for 150 years. It was fits and starts. It had some successes, and it had some near fatal crashes. But the story is remarkably positive if you keep to the theme of how we never gave up and we kept trying and we kept tinkering with it. And now, for example, I firmly believe, and this is not based on my own opinion, if you look around what other people have written about and the investors and where we are in certain endeavors, we're really on a full field press into a more optimistic future. And that's what I try to stay true to this book. Can a fan pick it up, and can a pro in training pick it up and find information that tells the American story without misrepresenting the facts and divorcing it from the international media?
Mark, why did it take so long? Why did it take so long for us to discover, and you certainly with this book here, that there are good stories? And I would argue that the DNA of American soccer is indeed positive, for the very simple fact of the lumps that we have taken as a collective soccer entity. But we have risen from those lumps and bumps to the point where we're at today in 2026. Why did it take so long?
Yeah, that's a great question with not an easy answer. I think, there's several different ways of answering the question. I think first and foremost, there aren't that many soccer books that attempt to tell the whole story or a large part of the whole story. For example, Gio, if you look at the 20 to 30 books that have been published on American soccer, and this is not the fault of the writers. This is probably more the fault of the American publishers. They do not want a general approach. They want a niche argument or book. They want to hear about the NASL. They want to hear about the early years of the MLS. They want to hear about one part or several series of the U.S. men's national team. They eschew trying to take on a larger project that looks at the entire history or maybe a century, because they don't like that approach to selling books. And frankly, book publishers are remarkably conservative, and they have too many football, gridiron, baseball people. I mean, I could tell a brief story about that if you would like. It's just remarkably funny that they're not necessarily soccer people, if you will. And what they do tend to publish, they just love people to complain about soccer because they think it sells. So I gave you two answers there. And it's part of the publishing industry. And then it's part of the fact that we just haven't had enough room and enough airtime to tell our own story. Because for too often, soccer has been given the short shrift from people in power.
Let's focus on your students. Did writing for the students change how you handled, the complexity or contradiction or failure in American soccer history compared to writing for a general adult audience? Did you handle that?
Yeah, great question. I think that it was a wonderful test test tube, if you will, or a beaker for me, because I could write a chapter. It might take a week or two after. Well, first, go back to you. You did ask about how I went about this. Probably like most writers, listen, who knows what's going on in the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s? There's not a lot written, although there's more written now in the last 10 to 15 years as newspapers and yearbooks in colleges have become digitized. So there's more stuff available now for authors and historians. That's true. But when you go back and read it, particularly the old stuff, I define subjectively the modern era of soccer from 1980 onward. That's a lot easier to get your hands on. So to go back and talk about the old stuff, what I would do is spend a week or two. No, I would spend several weeks to a month after reading stuff, and then I would start crafting my chapters. And then when I was ready, I would give the students the chapter, and then we would talk about it, and I would give them quizzes on it. And I would be able to see literally some sentences that they didn't understand, or some words or phrases that I thought should be relevant and easily understandable for a 16-year-old elite male soccer player that they just didn't get. So then I would tweak it. But I don't think that my audience from the beginning was young adult. I just don't want your readers or listeners to think that that's what it was. I wrote the book for adults, or for bright high schoolers, if you will. You have to put energy into this book. I mean, this is not a picture book. I mean, you have to sink your teeth into the chapters that move quickly across the landscape of soccer history in 10 to 15 pages. It's not for the faint of heart, but I stay away from statistics and each chapter tries to tell a story about a certain epoch, a certain decade or two from the history. But the students were wonderful because they didn't get it, or they didn't understand it, or they were bored to death. They were very quick to tell me.
So what were some of the aspects of American soccer history that excited or inspired your students?
Yeah, I mean, there are many. I'll just pick one. And this is one that I didn't know that much about, even though that I myself held myself out as a person who loves soccer. I would organize vacations around soccer. I have a son that's in the program. So most of my daily, weekly life away from my job, even if it was just about teaching English, was all about soccer. I didn't know that from 1921 to 1931 in the United States, on the northeast part of what I call the four corridors, basically from Baltimore, Philadelphia, on up through into Kearney, New Jersey, Brooklyn, New York City, Pawtucket, Rhode Island, Falls River, right on the border between Rhode Island and Massachusetts, up to Boston. That corridor, for a decade, 1921 to 1931, hosted a professional league. Started 10 teams, and at one time there were up to 14 fully functioning professional league. Now, that does not mean that every player on every team was drawing down a full salary. Certainly there are people that were employed by textile factories and the like that may have been getting bonuses or paid under the table, but the top players on each team were making a bona fide salary that were inching up towards what the baseball men were making. And some of these games up and down the four corridors were drawing 10 to 15,000 fans. And this, of course, was before really the advent of the baseball, the NBA, the NFL, and the hockey people. Soccer was on par and not nipping at the heels of the baseball people. But if you take a look at the baseball, if you take away the top 2 to 3 teams in the league, and you just look at the bottom half of the baseball people, the ASL of the 1920s was drawing more fans than half of the baseball teams. And it was on its way to be a verified, consistent, professional soccer league with really cool names. And I think when the kids read about that, like, wow, did they ever think that for 10 years, we had basically a fully functioning professional soccer league that was on its way to be internationally respected. There were many other stories like that. That was one. Another thing that my students really enjoyed learning about was that the soccer people, the soccer communities of the early 20s that stemmed from the textile companies, and then after 1910, really were being inspired by all kinds of companies, American companies like the tire companies or the steel companies or hat company. if you want to talk about the Hatters of St. Louis, they were producing players that were, in some cases, homegrown players that were remarkably diverse in comparison to what was going on with the NFL and the baseball world. When you take a look at the rosters, if you will, and if you take a look at who was playing soccer, it was always more diverse in terms of socioeconomics, even racially and ethnically, when you compare them to the other top four American team sports. And that is something that we should celebrate, and it's not talked about enough.
Well, all of that resonates quite significantly with me living here in the Boston area. Folks don't realize, unless you're from the Boston area or from the part of geography that you described, that you could make an argument that the most significant historical aspects of the game is right here in this area. Some people say St. Louis. St. Louis is the place where, soccer was, not so much born, but that was the hotbed of soccer. But I would counter by saying, as you just described, no, it was in this neck of the woods here, in the Boston area, down in particular, southeastern Massachusetts, where, as you noted, the textile mills, there were a lot of ethnic communities that obviously loved the game, and it was indeed the hotbed of soccer here in the United States of America. So
yeah, I think Gio, in 1884, I'm not sure how many people would know this, but Thomas Watson, he's the former assistant to Alexander Graham Bell, the telephone's inventor. He founded the Fore River Shipyard in southern Boston, which led to the creation of Fore River FC. And Fore River FC, it was a town of boat builders, and some of them doubled as soccer players. Was well known not only in the area but in the region, and went on to win some of the early AFA and some of the early national cups, if you will, right there from the Boston area. Certainly, it's got roots. Boston has roots, one of the original roots with Philadelphia and St. Louis and a couple of the other towns and cities on the East Coast, has roots almost as old as baseball, and putting out a wonderful soccer product and enjoying crowd support that would only have been eclipsed at the time by some baseball teams. How remarkable is that?
The Fore River Shipyard, as you noted, is about, I'm going to say, about 1.5 miles where I'm situated right now here in Quincy, Massachusetts.
Great.
Oh, I know the Fore River Shipyard. I don't know it as way back in those days, but yeah, when I was a kid growing up, it was a very, very vibrant shipbuilding area, and it has since closed, obviously. But I know the Fore River Shipyard quite well. I'm about 1.5 miles away. So, kind of on the same manner, if you will, sharing with your students, these great stories. What I do in similar fashion is I will bring to training every once in a while, Mark, the soccer ball that my father kicked around and the boots that he wore as a kid growing up in Italy. And then I would bring my first soccer ball and my first set of shoes to the kids, and they would look at it and they would just, how could you play with those boots? How could you kick that ball? And I'm guessing that when your students read these stories and their eyes light up and have the proverbial, I didn't know that. Well, I see that firsthand when I bring that stuff to the kids on the training ground. Like, well, how did you play? And it's wonderful, isn't it? When you see that,
it's wonderful.
It's wonderful.
Do you have, can you tell the maker of the shoe or the uniform when you bring some of that stuff? Or is that, you know what I mean, the actual logo? Does this predate Nike, Adidas, and go way back in your father, your grandfather's?
Oh, goodness, yes. These are Neanderthal leather balls going back. Well, my father was born in 1929, God rest his soul. So we're talking about he was a young man. So we're maybe 1940, maybe, 40, 45. He was still in Italy. And then the ball that he had was this, the old school leather, the leather panels that were physically sewn by hand with the rubber bladder.
Does it still hold air?
Not anymore. No. Look, this is wonderful. When I was a young kid growing up, he would bring it to the field, and it was the rubber bladder was still kind of, intact. We could blow it up, and I was able to knock the ball back and forth with my father using the very ball that he had used as a young kid growing up as well.
Wasn't that wonderful?
Absolutely, absolutely. So when I hear you tell the story about, the stories that your students are learning and really them enjoying it, I could not help but have the similar flashbacks with my father, the equipment and the athletes that I coach now, and I show them to them. They just, it's just amazing, just absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I wonder if any of your listeners have heard of Charles Goodyear, not the company, but
Nope. The man, yep.
The man, the inventor who invented the first. He's given credit for, of course, the vulcanization process that eventually led to the rubberization, if you will, of products that still exist today, and billions, even trillions of dollars if you add up everything that has a little bit of rubber in it. But what many people don't know is he created the first inflatable vulcanized rubber round ball and showcased it at the 1850 World Fair, if you will. And that ball then at the time, this is pre soccer, the laws of the game were not set down by the English until 1863. So here you have a decade and a half or so, an American of all people inventing the first quote unquote modern round inflatable rubberized soccer.
And you compare that now with the ball that they'll now be using in the upcoming World Cup.
The $200 one, right?
Yeah, the $200. Yes, indeed. It is absolutely mind-boggling to see the difference between the balls, the soccer balls that we're talking about, with the ball that is being used now at the highest levels, and as I said, at the upcoming World Cup. It's extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. So shifting back here, you've argued or discussed in your book that learning soccer history helps develop winning habits of mind. Can you share a concrete example of a moment when a student's perspective or behavior shifted because of this course?
Yeah, I mean, here's an example. I'm not, it's kind of hard to summarize, but I will do my best. I mean, some of the soccer players, okay, they're student athletes. They're here to get an education, 10 or 15%, and 1 out of 10 might go pro. The other 90% are going on to college, and in some cases, some wonderful places where they're going to continue to pursue soccer and hopefully maybe try to sign pro. But the vast majority of them are not going to make any money playing professional soccer. Here's what's curious about them, though. They sometimes get a negative attitude about the very sport that they are doing, and yet they are on the front lines, the tip of the spear of a top MLS program, Gio. So let me try to put it in perspective. I teach some of the best elite American footballers, soccer players in the country. Yet, before my class, some of them, maybe a lot of them, have a negative attitude about the sport that I think is inherited either from their parents or from the lack of the celebratory stories that have been told. I mean, people don't tell them. So they come into my class and they're grouchy. They're like, okay, United States just lost 2 games here in the last international window. So they'll say, oh, we suck, or MLS, it's awful. I mean, guys, you're a part of the pipeline. You guys should not be negative. You are part of the pipeline that leads to the promised land. So stop the knee-jerk reaction about complaining about soccer, because it's really, frankly, underscores a lack of understanding of our own history. I am not an MLS lover, but I'm certainly not an MLS hater, for example. So what the book does is it tries to give a better, deeper appreciation for the 4 times on American soil that soccer started, shot itself in the foot, and nearly expired, and nearly went extinct. And they start to realize why the MLS is structured the way it is, as a single entity structure nowadays that has a lot of more individualized parts going on. They start to realize the struggles that the United States national team has been through and how difficult it is to be consistently ranked in the top 20 and a legitimate top 20 country in all the federations. So I think what the book does, there's never really perhaps an aha moment, but what they realize after getting done reading about our remarkable story is they have a deeper appreciation for where we were, where they are, and where we could go in the next 10 to 20 years. And I think that that's part of the thing that I've enjoyed, because I see that cynicism in September that gradually falls away as they start to see and appreciate our long story.
I think part of their reaction has to do with the fact they're young. Obviously, these are young men. They haven't had to live through, the the downs and the challenging times. I'm old enough to remember to have seen the demise of a number of professional soccer leagues here in the United States of America. The single biggest flop, I guess, for the lack of better words, was the old NASL. That was supposed to be the league that was going to really push soccer to a whole other level. And, we all know the story of the NASL and the financial challenges that eventually caused its demise. And then for us to go without soccer. And if you were a soccer fan, a player, an aficionado back in those days, to not have a professional soccer league that you once had, it stays with you. It stays with you. And then when you get another league back, like we got MLS back, then you have a deeper appreciation of what MLS now affords us. And now over the course of how many years MLS has been in existence, you really have a deeper appreciation. They don't have that. They're still young. And hopefully your book, and I think it does, can kind of fill that gap of you don't really know, but maybe now you do know after having read your book. So you kind of touched upon this point already and part of your answer earlier. If you could add American soccer history to one part of the U.S. development pyramid nationwide, coaches, parents, players, administrators, where would it have the greatest impact?
Yeah, maybe you could give me a little bit more. Give me a sense of what you mean. Impact. Heck, I'd love everybody to read this book. Reach out to me. I'll give you a deep discount. But can you be more specific about what you're saying? Just give me a sense of what the context of that question is.
So again, if you could just take any part of American history in the United States, one part of it, and put it in the U.S. development pyramid in terms of player development, where would it have the most impact? Would it be amongst coaches? Would it be amongst parents? Would it be amongst players? Would it be amongst administrators? What group or what demographic, for the lack of better terms, would it have the greatest impact, do you think?
Yeah, great, Gio. So I'm going to give you the writer answer, and it may sound like I'm being disingenuous, but I'm not. I wrote this book with the idea that it could be picked up and read by an elite United States national team youth player in my class that's on the cusp of signing a professional contract. And he could read it and he could understand his history and our history. And so that when he's wearing the badge for the national team or the crest on his club team, he would feel comfortable in learning about our story. I had in mind I'm going to name some players that came out of the Philadelphia Union that may make the national team for the World Cup this summer. I had in mind the Brendan Aaronsons, the Mark McKenzies, the Austin Trustees of the world, the Cav Sullivans, that they could read us a book and they felt confident that they knew their own history. At the same time, I wanted to write a book that would be appealing to the soccer dad like me prior to reading 50 books on the subject, who thought he knew everything there was to know about soccer. I had him in mind, and I had the soccer mom in mind, those soccer moms and soccer dads, if you will, that are too happy to cheer on when someone scores a goal, when some fast kid puts his head down and runs past the smaller kid and scores. Those people that cheer without knowing anything about total football competencies. I wanted the book to be appealing to them. I wanted it to be appealing to a person who gets hired on a front office or the back office or an MLS or a USL team. Okay, you're hired to do sales, but you were a lacrosse player growing up in college. You don't know the first thing about soccer football. I wrote it for them as well. For somebody who's gearing up for the World Cup that may be half in and half out of the tent, who may have a grandkid, a sister or a brother or a cousin, or maybe even a kid that's starting to get really good at soccer, who's only 6, 7, or 8. Hey, I want to learn more about this sport. So yeah, I tried to write it to be appealing to a wide audience. I stayed away from statistics. I stayed away from charts. I stayed away from graphs. It doesn't have any footnotes. It has endnotes. So I tried to make it appealing. Can you read 20 chapters and come away after a few sittings to say, okay, I get it. This sport is almost as old as baseball in this country. It is incredibly diverse relative to other sports, and it has a lot of passionate people, and it's growing. Maybe not by leaps and bounds, but it's growing, and it will continue to grow, probably even faster now after this summer's World Cup. and it's here to stay.
Let's fast forward, because we can go chapter by chapter and be here all day long, and I could stay here all day long. But let's kind of fast forward to chapter 20, total immersion. You introduced this idea of total immersion. It's late in the book, like I said, chapter 20. What's the one part of that concept that people tend to underestimate or even misunderstands when they first hear this idea of total immersion?
Right. So let me define what I mean by total immersion and then talk about how certain clubs are getting close to it, and then perhaps talk about why I think it's important. So total immersion as a concept, the way I define it, means that the American elite, male and sometimes and coming up female athletes, are totally immersed in the game. And what I mean by that is both the athletic component, of which the United States is doing pretty well on, is combined with the social academic component that nearly approximates what will be going on a soccer mad country. And that flywheel effect, by wrapping the athletic component around the social academic component, where the boys and girls' dreams are fully supported 24/7, 5 days a week, on through their middle and upper school career, leads them to fall in love with the sport and never feel like they're a second-class citizen. And that's where what I mean by total immersion. And I think that the clubs that have found a way to do that are creating data and statistics that bear out and prove without a doubt that American soccer people and educators, when they're working together, can create these really unique atmospheres and environments that are really putting our kids in a pre-professional and then a professional environment. And if more people did what a couple of the clubs at the the MLS level are doing, imagine how good we could be. So if you want me to plumb some of the depths in that, I feel very strongly about it. And I just think it's a remarkable opportunity of where we could be going if more clubs and more MLS and USL teams could look at the whole aspect of training as not just soccer specific. It has to be holistic.
At the risk of oversimplifying your point, it's like we had one, but we didn't have the other. The one being, we're playing the game of soccer, and it ended there. Is that a safe analysis, a safe way to kind of look at your response there?
Yeah, let me try an anecdote for the listeners. Imagine an MLS team, an unknown team. We'll just call it Memphis. They don't have an MLS team. But let's say MLS comes to Memphis in 2 years, and they hire the best soccer coaches by far from U8 on up to U18. Their whole academy has they're all Pep Guardiola and Pep Guardiola's brothers. And their academy director is the best director out of the 31. Now it's 30 teams in the MLS. But let's just say the entire soccer side is firing on all cylinders. So for 90 minutes a day, Gio, your son, if you had any, or my son, is getting the best soccer instruction for 90 minutes a day. And then on the weekends, they come in and they have games, either at Memphis, fields, or they're playing Tennessee. Okay. They have the best competition on the best fields with the best coaches, right? Imagine that scenario. But here's the thing. On Tuesday, at the end of practice at 7:30, the kids on that team, say that's U15 team, those 15-year-olds at 7:30 go home, shower, do some homework, go to sleep, get up, and go to their local high school. And that local high school has a bunch of sports, all kinds of sports, but I guarantee you that soccer isn't first. There's cheerleaders, nothing wrong with cheerleaders. There's gridiron, baseball, lacrosse, the whole array of sports. And nobody understands their dream. And they go through the whole day. And that school doesn't have to be imagined. It's the school that you went to, Gio, or where many of our listeners went to. It's just a normal high school. And then they come back at 5 o'clock to train for that 90 minutes with some of the best coaches in the country. If you will, let me shill. It's going to sound too much like Philly Union, but I got to explain what my son sees every day. and he's very lucky. Imagine another school, say the YSC Academy where I teach. Briefly, let me describe it. And I just mean this sincerely. My son and I get up because I teach there. We get up at 7 in the morning. We spend 50 minutes getting there. My son will knock out, his homework, and then he'll look through his social media feeds. He'll watch, his Liverpool and Yamin Yamal. All right, we're going to go to practice in the morning. He will get dropped off at the Union's Fields for morning training at 8:30 in the morning. And for 90 minutes, he has his first session from 8 to 9:30. 9:30, he'll shower in a multi-million-dollar facility. And then he'll walk 5 minutes to class. He will come over to the academic building with the other 85 boys. He'll get breakfast and he'll hang out and he'll talk. And then he'll come to class at 10:30 in the morning and he'll have his academic classes that are crunched into the middle of the day, where he's surrounded by 15 caring adults. He has a soccer coaches meeting where they're doing videos up in the conference room. He'll meet with the first team's nutritionists who come down every 2 weeks to give the boys lesson. He'll meet soccer coaches that come back to the school that are really keen to recruit from YSC Academy because they're trained in a professional environment. And then at 3:30, his last class is over, and my son River will walk to his 4:30 session. And he'll do that every day, every week, every month for 4 years. And oh, by the way, on the weekend, the first team tickets, Union's not doing very well this year. I know that. But what I'm saying is that the weekend, half the school's kids will end up going to the stadium because the tickets are easy to get. And the school and the academy both have boxes that are connected by a sliding glass door. So every given home game, he might see half of his peers in the stadium or in the stadium box as they're watching Cav Sullivan and now this kid Malik, who's getting a lot of playing time, who's an 11th grader in the school. So the dream is reinforced. He's totally immersed in soccer, and these kids do not know how lucky they are. And the Union is lucky that they're able to create this total immersive environment. They're not the only ones doing it, but they're one of the few that are doing it. Immersing students in a holistic environment where the dream is palpable every day, where you can see a line from a U12 team on up to the first team in the stadium lights. And by the way, 90% of you who are not going to get a pro contract, congratulations. You're going off now to a Division I college where you're off and on scholarship. So it's a win-win situation from many of the parents' perspective. Not perfect, but remarkable. And if you look at the statistics for what the Union has been able to do in the last 10 years, it can't fight with the statistics.
I'm a retired school teacher, so this resonates with me regarding the educational aspects of which you speak of. What these young guys are getting far surpasses, and you know the answer to this already, far surpasses that. And I'm not knocking any other, our educational system in the United States, or good teachers or good students or good classroom, that type of thing. But what these guys are experiencing far surpass what the regular kid in a non-soccer, more traditional education environment are getting, because it's every aspect of it is fueling this idea of community, fueling this idea, if I work hard, I can achieve these things, fueling a dream of, heck, I may not play MLS, but I could go to college. They have such a tremendous advantage versus their counterparts in the academic sense. Does that make sense, Mark?
Yeah, it does. And just let me share this other anecdote because it's genuine and it's real and it's timely. Here's an example. There's a U18 team last week did not go to what we call the Generation Adidas Cup. Your listeners may know that. The Generation Adidas Cup is not just for the MLS teams, although it's easier for them to get into it. But it's really the showcase tournament in and around the country this past week. And many of the top teams in America and some top U teams from around the world attended that. But guess what? They don't have a U18 version. So our U18 team, our U18 team went to the Dallas Cup. Now listen, the U18 team does not have the best players because you know where the best players are? They're already pros. They're already playing on the first team or they're already sold. Like these U18 kids who have been together for a decade, they started at U8. And yeah, they had some people drop out and some people come in. But the bevy, the vast majority of the kids on the team, like 15 or so, have been around for a decade. and they've been at the school for a decade, and they played together for a decade, and they've been living the dream for a decade. They just won. Their top 5 guys aren't there. The top 5 guys are already pro. Cav Sullivan, Pierre, I could just name the 6 kids that the union has bought and then sold to other MLS clubs and USL. So you take the top guys off. These are college-bound kids, just won the Dallas Cup, which is not easy to do. Well, why are they able to do that? Well, yeah, they're really good soccer players. But what they have that others don't is a community sense of following the dream within a caring environment where they're able to see their lives as a continuum where they're trying as hard as they can to become pro. And they understand that most of them won't, but they have soccer in the DNA from the moment they wake up in the morning until the moment they go to school. Now, I understand for some of your listeners will say, that's crazy. You don't have band, you don't have chorus, you don't have high-end art class. That's true. That's true. But what they do have is football for 3 or 4 hours a day, classes truncated and put into the middle of the day where they have their 5 core academic classes and no study hall, and they're around pros in and around the building, in and around an athletic environment. I've never seen a kid vaping or a cigarette anywhere near campus. These kids are hyper focused on a dream, and they just want to grind every day. And they're going to be just fine, I would be willing to suggest, when they go into other careers that may have something to do with soccer. And for the vast majority of them, won't have anything to do with soccer. They understand what it means to be a team player. They understand that winning takes hard work. They understand teammates. They understand how to talk to different kinds of people. And they understand roadblocks, injuries, faster players, not getting playing time, but they don't quit. So yeah, the schools that have been able to do what we're doing, and there are many in the Boston area, some in the Boston areas and all over the United States that are figuring out a way to combine academics and the social environment with high-level football training, are producing some remarkable student athletes, and more need to do it. More need to do it.
I would be remiss, Mark, if I didn't ask you on just a couple of things before we close out our conversation here. I've been watching and listening with great interest Landon Donovan's recent comments about the game here in this country. And he's on a bit of a crusade about changing the game. He talks at length about player development. He talks at length about pay to play. He talks at length about the corporatization of youth sports. And I know that this is a big question, but what are your thoughts on those elements that I just described? What are some of the things that that need to be tackled here in this country regarding the sport of soccer?
Yeah, I mean, this is hard to go into the ocean of what you just said at the end of our little show here. Because
and I knew when I look at my show notes, I'm like, do you really want to end with that? Because that's a big one. But again, I would be remiss if I didn't at least get a taste of what your thoughts are.
But listen, it's not revolutionary, and I don't have the elixir. I don't have the elixir and coming back with the flaming sword and the elixir that's going to fix this problem. What we have to do is keep hammering at it. Tim Howard talks about that in his foreword. I was fortunate enough to have Tim write the foreword to my book together with Kevin Sullivan. And Tim talks about how Americans need to keep hammering at it. We need to keep pivoting, and we need to keep finding the American way, whatever that American way is. He stays away from being as critical as his partner in Unfiltered Soccer as Landon. Landon, as you pointed out, has been a little bit more controversial in pointing out some of the things that we haven't done well, and we need to continue. But if I could just put a couple things on it, and maybe one is really high level, and then the other is lower level. At the highest levels, we really need the USSF and the major MLS teams to work closely together. And they're so far apart right now. And books, not book, but books could be written about the rocky relationship between the USSF and the MLS teams. And I touch on this in my book, that wouldn't it be remarkable if the USSF and the MLS teams would realize that they're actually part of the same team, that what we need in America is strong American youth development. And let's be frank, the MLS teams already have the peak of the mountain, which are the 30 pro teams in the country. And yeah, they're going to receive some competition from the USL. But until further notice, the MLS and the MLS Next system really has put down pipelines on their mountain to their peak, to the pro team. And that's wonderful. We should celebrate that, and we should figure out a way to widen the pipe. One of the ways to do that is get the American owners to realize that American youth development and the academy teams are important and are the way to go to improve not only their product at the MLS level, but how many good players and great players end up playing in Europe and on up to the United States men's national team. And the USSF should just get off their hands and realize and start giving credit to the MLS teams and resources. Now, that will probably irritate a good segment of whatever listeners we have right now that are going to say pay to play, it's broken on zone one, which is what the USSF calls single digits. And if I could just wade into the waters briefly, parents and local clubs, non-MLS clubs, the super clubs, need to realize that to create relationships with the local MLS team, I know that they're going to be afraid of losing their best players. I know that they may not want to reach out and engage in the MLS people, but they have to. We have to create a system where our better players, starting at the single digit eras, and our diverse players are pushed into better and better programs. And that means the super clubs, that means the MLS teams need to work better. And I think that there's some indication that they are, and they're getting away, if you will, from just cabining themselves and locking down the hatches and just saying, just stay away from me. I don't need your help. But we need a lot more coordination at every level of the system. And I know what I've laid out perhaps may sound unrealistic, and like we've been saying this for decades, but we are seeing some movement up front on the MLS side, on the USSF side, on down to all the super clubs around the country. Listen, some of our soccer clubs, many of them, have facilities that rival some of the best soccer football clubs in Europe. We have the facilities and we have smart people. What we really need now is more efforts on the human side, on the coordination side, to help and share and realize that we're all connected. And the path to youth development, there is no one path or one right path. There has to be many. And that requires coordination and teamwork and money.
Well, your words to the soccer gods' ears, as they say here in the United States of America. Well put. Our guest today on the GP Soccer Podcast conversation with the author is Mark Franek. He's written the terrific book, American Soccer Nation, the remarkable 150-year history of Yanks on a roll from the mock football to the modern game. Mark, many thanks for coming on the GP Soccer Podcast. Greatly appreciated.
Gio, thank you very much for the time, and thank you, listeners, for your time as well.